You're live with Lucy Hockings. Australia has lost more mammal species than any other continent and has one of the worst rates of species decline among the world's richest countries. It's according to a 5-yearly environmental report card released by the government. Let's go live to Canberra. We can talk to Freya Cole, who is a spokesperson for the Australian Conservation Foundation. Freya, good to see you. There's been drought, there's been bushfires, there's flooding as well, climate change, so much going on for the wildlife in Australia. And this is awful, this news today. What did this report say?
I wish I could bring you good news, Lucy, but unfortunately the State of the Environment report, which comes out every 5 years, has very little to be hopeful about. It makes for very grim reading. Your audiences will remember the 2019 to 2020 Black Summer bushfires that had a catastrophic impact on nature here in Australia. We lost 1 to 3 billion animals in that crisis. More than 8 million hectares of land was burnt. So that is just one chapter in this huge report. Of course, climate change is having a great impact on the places we love, like the Great Barrier Reef, and the species we love as well. Australia losing more mammals than any other continent in the world is a national shame. We're losing species that are unique to this continent. So we're talking about the bandicoot, for example. There is nowhere else in this world that we can find the bandicoot. So once it's gone, it is gone. And environmentalists and conservationists are incredibly concerned after the release of this report.
Freya, there's been a recent change in government in Australia. Does that mean also a change in attitude that you're seeing towards conservation?
There is a change in attitude, Lucy. We are hopeful that the new Labor government will bring about change. There is, of course, a lot of talk at the moment. They've only been in power around 6 weeks, so we will give them some time before we start campaigning really hard. But there is a real sticking point here in Australia, and that's fossil fuels. The federal government still has a huge reliance on fossil fuels. They are approving new coal and gas, and we simply can't allow it to happen, especially in this decade. We are seeing climate change having a huge impact, not just here in Australia, but around the world. Lucy, to find out that there in the UK, you're having temperatures nearing 40 degrees. That is not normal. We are in a climate crisis. So we are calling on the Australian government and governments right around the world to phase out coal and gas because we need to transition rapidly to renewable energy.
Freya, we are going to get that temperature today. There's already been in the last hour or so record-breaking temperatures, the highest temperature ever recorded. We've just been watching some pictures as we've been speaking to you of some of the animals, and you mention some of those that are unique to Australia. We just saw the platypus, for instance. Tell us a bit more about some of these precious species and which ones are at risk that might be more familiar to us, perhaps.
So the platypus, of course, is a very elusive creature. There is very little data known on the platypus, but you may have seen recent flooding right across New South Wales. That is destroying riverbanks, which is where platypus live. So we know the platypus is at extreme risk. Everybody around the world knows the koala. The koala is now endangered across New South Wales, Queensland, and here in the ACT. If we want to see koalas in the wild, we need to act rapidly to stop land clearing of their habitat. We're also talking about beautiful bird species like the gang cockatoo. Even the bogong moth is now endangered. Now, without a tiny little creature like the moth, animals and ecosystems cannot survive. There are so many unique species that you can only find here in Australia that are at extreme risk of extinction. And we need to act this decade if we want to protect these species.